Hey folks, I'm doing a special video series on the eclipses of the summer of 2019, the solar eclipse new moon in Cancer happening on July 2 and the full moon lunar eclipse in Capricorn happening on July 16. So we have to see them as a unit, as a complex of energy, as working together to initiate certain processes within the collective. So we want to have a sense of the deeper evolutionary imperatives of these eclipses, the deeper processes of energy within the collective that are helped along by this eclipse pair. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video series. So this video, which will address the solar eclipse in Cancer on July 2, is to be taken along with the video addressing the lunar eclipse in Capricorn on the 16th. So what I'm going to do is hop off screen and do this in a screencast so you can follow the chart as I go along and have a better visual appreciation of what's going on. All right, so let's just take a bit of a step back to situate these eclipses. So we have to look at these eclipses in the broader context of Saturn and Pluto and their protracted presence at the south node of the moon. So Saturn and Pluto are conjunct, joined up with the south node in Capricorn and opposite the Cancer north node. So we see here on the chart that at the time of the solar eclipse, in Cancer on July 2, Saturn is at 17 degrees of Capricorn and is tightly conjunct the south node at 17 degrees, and Pluto is close by at 22 degrees. Now we know that with Saturn and Pluto at the lunar south node, in broad terms, we are dealing fundamentally with unresolved karmic energy around the sign principle of Capricorn and how we have expressed that sign principle throughout the human collective on the planet. So signs are fields of intelligence fields, but they are part of a certain energetic architecture. And as Saturn and Pluto activate the Capricorn field by their presence in the sign, what we are invited to do as a whole is to rehabilitate facets of the energetic architecture of Capricorn. So, in other words, the signs are archetypes, and Capricorn is an archetype, but it's also a field, a creative substance, let's say, used in the molding of life as we know it on the planet. So, just as red and yellow and blue are primary colors from which we derive other colors, from which we create other colors. Let's just say that the signs function similarly in that they are the primary energetic substances from which psychological realities are made. And make no mistake, life on Earth, human life, is a psychological reality that we create with the crayons, with the primary colors, let's say, of the signs. So signs are the baseline architecture, and the planets are the active creative agents energizing the sign fields and marshalling these sign fields to actively fulfill creative potentials to create. So we know that with Saturn and Pluto at the Capricorn lunar south node, we are collectively in a process of facing the shadow of Capricornian systems and structures. We have the inner psychological structures of our relationship to responsibility, integrity, the use of authority, and our relationship to our spiritual authority. With Saturn and Pluto at the South Node, we are looking at where, as a collective, we have abdicated our responsibility and misused our power, or failed in important ways to assume our power. So these are the more inner psychological structures and their shadow pertaining there to Capricorn, Saturn and Pluto there. And then we have the outer structures, government, political, institutional. So we are also, with Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, looking at the shadow of these outer structures. And of course, how we construct governments and our various institutions is a direct reflection of our inner our internal psychological relationship to Saturn and Pluto. So our internal psychological relationship to responsibility, integrity, and power. So the outer is a reflection of the inner. So with Saturn at the South Node, we are facing the spiritual, evolutionary, and karmic consequences of our collective misaligned actions, our misaligned use of the Capricorn substance. So hard lessons and karma coming home there to roost. So Pluto at the South Node also dredges up the unconsciousness surrounding how we have expressed Capricorn historically on the planet, abuse and misuse of power, intimidation, institutional secrecy, used as a control mechanism. And we have this dovetailing with the karma of the United States as we near America's Pluto return, and this solar eclipse at 10 degrees of Cancer is activating the USA's Cancer Sun, which is at 13 degrees of the sign. And the lunar eclipse that we will talk about in part 2 also triggers the USA's Mercury in Cancer by opposition and will conjunct the USA's Pluto. So the USA's Mercury-Pluto opposition along the Cancer-Capricorn axis speaks to the history of institutional secrecy and withholding or burying or hiding of information as a means of control. So Pluto in Capricorn there in opposition to the USA's Mercury, natally, so to speak there. So it's beyond the scope of this video, but American history is replete with scenarios of the powers that be, withholding information from the people as a means of control. So the lunar eclipse that comes on July 16 will activate that Mercury-Pluto dynamic in the USA's chart and tap into the evolutionary task that the people in that country and indeed the world have signed up for. Coming into more empowerment, that's Pluto, in relation to cognition and perception, Mercury. And because of the USA's position in the world, their karma is also the world's karma in very direct ways. The use and abuse of information to control and manipulate people in the world. Our collective history and karma is very intertwined with that of the United States. Anyway, so within all of this, as the North Node is in Cancer, this shows us the way forward, the energy substance, the archetype, the energy architecture that points the way forward for us to collectively remedy and correct our Capricorn imbalances. So with the North Node in Cancer, Cancer is the corrective for Capricorn. Cancer is the corrective mechanism for the shadows of the Capricorn archetype. And this is the logic there of polarity in opposing sign pairs. So though opposite, they share a relationship of complementarity. So we are meant to let opposing sign energies complement each other, augment each other. So Cancer shows us the kinds of qualities that we need to embody as a collective to get through the karmic corridor until 2020 at the very least. And Cancer, nurturance, care, protectiveness, a consciousness of family, tribe, the energy of the mother, which we are going to talk about later on in part 2. So this total solar eclipse at 10 degrees of Cancer, the sun and the moon are joined up at 10 degrees of the sign pictured here in the 4th house of the chart. This Cancer solar eclipse will be affecting people and entities with important placements, important planetary placements at 6 to 14 degrees of Cancer and 6 to 14 degrees of the cardinal signs Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn. So the entire cardinal axes there, axes being affected. So planets and points and angles being activated and stimulated by this total solar eclipse show us where in our personal lives we have the opportunity to tap into and to serve the Cancerian needs of the collective. So where we are refining parts of our personal expression to bring them more in line with what is needed for the collective. Now, we don't really have a sense of the magnitude of this. So each of us operates in our individual lives. We have our individual sphere of operation, and we're not so readily aware of the collective impact of our combined individual evolution. So where this solar eclipse conjuncts important placements in Cancer, this will be in the most pronounced way where there is a seeding of energy relative to the planet involved, a profound new beginning, which gives us individually an opportunity to serve the needs of the collective through our individual karma and our individual psychological growth and unfoldment. So, for example, if it's Mercury that's being stimulated by the eclipse, it relates to your perception of the world, your thoughts, your ideas, your communication. So a profound seeding of energy in relation to the planet involved. You also want to pay attention to where the solar eclipse conjuncts any angles of the chart, or where the solar eclipse may conjunct any rulers of the angles of the chart. So let's say if the solar eclipse conjuncts your Jupiter, and if Jupiter rules your ascendant or your midheaven, you want to make a note of where and how this energy percolates throughout your field and throughout your life. So if the eclipse opposes or squares any important planets in your chart, the evolutionary pressure is on for a refinement of those planets, those psychological functions, especially through the vehicle of your relationships or external situations which seed a new beginning for you relative to the expression of that planet. So the broader collective picture is that the refinement and new beginnings, your new psychological growth and unfoldment, serves the larger Cancerian needs of the planet, the cultivation of emotional intelligence, values of care, and nurturance. Now, when we look at the solar eclipse, we see the sun and the moon here in a wider opposition with Saturn in Capricorn. So the sun and the moon, like we said, are at 10 degrees of Cancer, opposing Saturn at 17 degrees of Capricorn. And we note, of course, that there is a strong emphasis, a double emphasis on the archetypal signatures here. We have an activation of the Cancer-Capricorn axis as the nodes are there, but we also have the rulers of the nodes in their home signs opposing each other, the moon at home there in Cancer and Saturn at home there in Capricorn. So the Cancer moon is opposite Saturn in Capricorn. Now, at its core, this eclipse represents the initiation of an energetic process which facilitates the feeding of Cancerian energy into Capricorn systems and structures. So this is the core here. This eclipse, this pair of eclipses this summer, represents a process in which Cancerian energy is fed into Capricorn systems on the planet. So these eclipses represent an energetic window or gateway which supports a deeper process happening throughout the collective consciousness. So the two eclipses are working together in this way, and the full moon lunar eclipse represents a culmination of this process. So these eclipses are energetically setting up a foundation for the feeding of Cancerian energy into Capricorn systems, something which will reverberate in months and years to come. So in simple terms, we are looking at an injection of so-called hometown values, care, emotional support, sympathetic and empathetic understanding, a consciousness of tribe and family into systems which have lost their way in the shadows of the Capricorn archetype. Lack of concern and care, coldness, rigidity, rigid boundaries, excessive control, superiority complexes, abdication of responsibility, hierarchical top-down control, covert manipulation by institutions, abuse of power, Pluto in Capricorn there. So the solar eclipse in Cancer represents a seeding of an energetic process designed to achieve more balance between the lunar Cancerian psychic architecture on the planet and the Saturnian or Capricornian one. So the solar eclipse represents a powerful active seeding of a more archetypally feminine mode of consciousness, moon in Cancer, into these Capricorn systems, Saturn in Capricorn. Now, we also need to take a look at another facet of the configuration of this solar eclipse new moon to understand more of the totality of what is happening here. So we see on the chart that the sun and the moon at 10 degrees of Cancer, they are square Chiron in Aries. So in broad terms, what this represents is confronting the emotional consequences, feeling the pain of the damage we have done as a result of the misalignment of the Saturn Capricorn energy matrix. So the corporation, which cannot now run away from a cognizance of the pain and suffering, that's Chiron, the pain and suffering that its policies and methods have caused, especially to those on the planet needing our care, animal, human, and plant life requiring our empathetic care, protection, and nurturance. So this solar eclipse brings into sharp focus the responsibility, Saturn Capricorn, that we have to care, moon in Cancer, as we are custodians of the planet. So responsibility and care are two sides of one coin. The oppositional logic there, complementarity between Cancer and Capricorn, responsibility and care. So one of the ways in which the Saturn Capricorn matrix has gone into misalignment is the way in which, on a collective level, we have insulated ourselves from pain, from the pain of recognizing what our failure to take responsibility for and to care for our human environment has caused, what our failure to care has caused, what our lack of responsibility to care for the world around us has caused. So with this solar eclipse, there is a strong emphasis on the emotional body and the recognition of pain and suffering, Chiron. So for us as a collective to consent to abuse of power, Pluto in Capricorn there, hierarchical top-down control, coldness, and a lack of care, which is evident in much of the policies and the methodologies of our governing institutions, there has had to be a corresponding shutting down of our feeling centers, moon Cancer. And when we look at the anatomy of the human, this in many ways, our feeling centers, this in many ways is our strongest asset, our emotional body, and our capacity to register feeling. So let's just say that in many ways, those who are invested in perpetuating old Capricorn ways of being, the Capricorn shadow, have had to actively suppress and numb the emotional intelligence of the human. There has had to be, in many ways, a shutting down of the full range of expression of the human being, the full range of expression of the human feeling centers. And this is something that we will have the task to reclaim and preserve as we restore some dignity to being human. So the entrenchment of certain Saturn structures which privilege authoritarian control, rigidity, and coldness, have depended on a shutting down of Cancerian energy or a distortion of it. So with this solar eclipse in Cancer, There is a confrontation with the emotional consequences of our actions, the emotional consequences of our misalignment relative to the Capricorn archetype. So the Cancer moon is square Chiron. We confront the emotional consequence of pain. But there is also here the potential for the opening up of feeling centers, for us to become more sensitive, more emotionally intelligent. And the opening up of this sensitivity and emotional intelligence correspondingly opens up pathways for restoration and healing, Chiron. So a little note here as well that Cancer and the moon strongly emphasize this idea of ancestry, the family, ancestral karma. We can be sure that whatever healing and restoration of our feeling centers that we undertake also feeds back into our own ancestors. Let's say to the ancestors of our species, whose neuroses and distortions of consciousness we have also unfortunately inherited. So our collective historical abuse or misuse of power, whether individually in our own lives or institutionally through state agents, corporations, governments, stealing resources from each other, and the ways in which we disenfranchise each other on the planet, so powerfully captured by Saturn and Pluto at the South Node. This profoundly demonstrates our own disempowerment and the disempowerment that we have inherited, which convinces us that the misuse of power is the only way to create reality. So Saturn-Pluto represents the power, that's Pluto, to create or construct reality, that's Saturn. And as they are together at the South Node, this idea is emphasized throughout the collective. And as Saturn and Pluto begin a new synodic cycle, we are once again having to eliminate some of the old ways that we have been constructing human reality based on a consciousness of disempowerment. So these are the tasks of our times. So as we rehabilitate our feeling centers and emotional intelligence, symbolized by Cancer, the Cancer archetype, we are also helping to restore those who came before, those whose DNA we share. So let's just say that there is a lot riding on the human project and our capacity as humans to remember who we are as beings of dignity who have forgotten the more profound realities of our origins. So in video 2, we will take a look at the lunar eclipse full moon in Capricorn on July 16 and the continuation of the narrative or story. So when the link is live, I will put the link to part 2 in a pinned comment below the video, in the end screen, and also in the description box below. Now, of course, if you'd like these videos to be sent to your inbox, links to my email list can be found in the description box below. And as always, I'm available for private astrological counseling consultations, and links to that can also be found in the description box below. So wishing you a peaceful new moon, a peaceful solar eclipse, and until next time, talk soon. Bye.